Hello, students, and welcome back. Chapter 1 was a very long chapter, the longest one in the book. But just a quick summary before we move on to Chapter 2. We met our three protagonists, the main characters in the book. We have Martha and her two best friends, the McGill brothers. Their names are actually Trevor, and Eli, but their nicknames are Trout and Eel because many of the people in Oak Grove think they have some strange characteristics. So at the end of chapter 1, the three friends were talking about how they weren't happy with the way things are, and Eel suggests that they do something about it. And that's where we left off for chapter 1. If you have any questions about chapter 1 before you move on to chapter 2, please email me or comment on my Google Classroom page. So, chapter 2. At midnight, the wind in the trees can sound like the ocean. The moonlight can make a road appear as endless as the sea. Martha noticed this as she climbed out her window, stopping to tack a note for her father to the door before she headed to meet the McGills. She had her backpack in which she had stowed crackers and peanut butter for herself, sardines for the boys, along with a change of clothes and her mother's yellow shawl. Being out so late reminded Martha of the way her mother sometimes would wake her unexpectedly to bring her out onto the lawn to dance beneath the stars. Standing in the dark and thinking about her mother and the way she would laugh as they sneaked out of the house as if they shared the best secret in the world did something strange to Martha. Her mother suddenly seemed present in some deep way. Martha didn't know if she could take another step, but then she heard Trout whistle and she started running. Before she knew it, she was halfway down the road to the place where Trout and Eel were waiting beside the mailbox that Hildy Swoon had cleaned with a stiff metal brush to get rid of every bit of dust and grime. "We have a compass and $35, Eel told Martha as they started down the road. "We charted the route to Ocean City, and if we walk 8 hours a day, we'll be there in 10 days. 10 days? Martha was surprised. "I only brought enough food for one night." "You don't have to go." Trout didn't look at Martha as he spoke. She knew he was giving her the chance to change her mind. "Of course I do." Martha wasn't about to lose her best friends. If they were gone, there would be no one to talk to, no one to trust. "You'd be lost without me," she said. People went searching for their dreams all the time, didn't they? Still, Martha dragged... can't get the page to turn. Martha dragged behind the boys in the moonlight. She was thinking about how sad her father was and how he would feel when he went to wake her up for school and discovered she was gone. All he would find would be her open window, along with the note on the door. "I'm sorry," she'd written. "I love you, but I don't feel I belong here anymore." "Race you to the town line," Eel called. The friends ran as fast as they could, with Eel, always the fastest, out in front. Excuse me. They raced down Main Street, past the shuttered grocery that Martha's father owned, past the bakery and what was once the dance studio, past Charlie McGill's construction company. They turned onto Elm and ran along the dried-out bed of Penman's Creek. They hurried through the dark, raising clouds of dust, laughing until they reached the sign that said Oak Grove, Home Sweet Home. Martha stared at the words. Her throat and eyes felt hot, as if this silly sign could make her cry. "Which way?" Eel said softly in the dark. The moon was behind a cloud, and Martha and Trout felt tentative as well. They were both thinking of people who disappeared and were never found again, and how hard it was to leave behind the people you loved, even if the life you wanted wasn't the only one they could give you. Trout took out the compass, then pointed down the road, east to the ocean. We just keep going. They told themselves they weren't runaways. They were run-tos, but running is running either way. After a while, they all felt as though they had eaten spoonfuls of lead, and that made running even more difficult. After the first mile, they had the shivers. A mile more, and they had the shakes. Oak Grove seemed very far away, and then when they walked through the woods, they could hear things moving. Owls and shrews, bobcats and raccoons, deer so startled to see the three friends cutting across the meadow. They froze in place. Sounds to me like the three friends might be thinking that this isn't the best idea. Two 13-year-olds and an 11-year-old heading down to the ocean by themselves. Must be scary out there all alone at night. All right, paragraph at the bottom of the page. When Martha's feet began to hurt and the boys' eyes grew blurry, they stopped to make camp beneath a twisted oak tree, one of the oldest in the county. Tomorrow, school would start at exactly 8:30, but they wouldn't be in attendance. If they hadn't had other concerns, they might have begun to worry about what people would think when they didn't show up for their classes. But for now, all they could concentrate on was their growling stomachs. Martha unpacked the food she had brought along, and Eel produced a thermos, although too much salt had been added to the water for Martha to take more than a sip. In the moonlight, McGill brothers' complexions turned faintly blue, and the webbing between their fingers was iridescent. "What's the matter?" Trout asked when he caught Martha staring. "Afraid you're out here with freaks?" "I'm out here with my two best friends," Martha said. Trout looked at her with so much gratitude. Martha knew they would be friends forever, no matter what their final destination might be. Eel was exhausted, but ever since he'd lost his seashell, he'd had trouble getting to sleep. He needed a story, the comforting babble of voices like waves on the shore. "Tell me about when you danced with your mother," he said to Martha. "We'd go outside when everyone else in the town was sleeping," Martha told him, even though she told him this story many times before. She always wore her yellow shawl. Martha reached into her backpack and brought out the shrunken shawl. The boys understood that even though she was running to something, she was also running away. "You can still wear it," Trout told her. "You can dance right here, right now." But there were no stars in the sky, and Martha shook her head. Her face was cloudy. "I don't know if I remember the dances. I'm afraid that before long, I won't remember her either." "We don't remember our first mother," Eel said. The boys rarely spoke of their lives before they'd come to Oak Grove. "I remember," Trout said, "or at least some things. I remember that she liked to swim, and when she laughed, it sounded like a waterfall." They were so tired they fell asleep without trying. They were still far from the ocean, but Trout dreamed the same dream he had every night. He was on a beach, and before him the water was dark. A storm was coming up, just like Charlie McGill had always feared. And out in the waves, someone was hurt and going under. Someone was calling to him. "Swim," she was saying, "swim to the land." Where Eel slept in a tangle of leaves, he had the very same dream as his brother, but he didn't know it. Because he was younger, he didn't remember as much, awake or in his dreams. All he saw were the blue waves. Whoever was so far out to sea, he couldn't make out her face. The blue of everything was filling up his eyes and his heart and everything he had ever known. Martha had a different dream entirely. In her dream, she was on a street that was made of sugar, and every time she tried to dance, she slipped, and there was no one beside her to break her fall. Martha lurched out of sleep, still feeling as if she were falling. It was morning, but the sky was gray and thick with storm clouds. This definitely was not good weather for running to anything. Up above, the branches of the old oak were shaking, harder and harder still. One of the branches groaned as it broke. Before Martha could move away, it crashed onto her arm. Why don't you go ahead and pause the audio for a moment, and you can answer on Chapter 2, questions 1 through 12. Those questions cover the material that I just read out loud to you. So questions 1 through 12. All right, let's find out what happens with Martha. So the branch crashed and fell on her arm. Without thinking, she called out for her mother. Trout hurried over and hauled the branch off. He asked Martha if she could move her arm, but it hurt too much to try. "This isn't good," Trout said. "It will be fine," Martha insisted, but she didn't sound very sure of herself, and when she sat up, the pain made her gasp. She could tell from the expression in Trout's eyes that the dream of the ocean was fading, and she didn't want to be the reason for a loss like that. "I mean, it'll be fine," she insisted, "and I'm not going back if that's what you're thinking." "You have to see Dr. Marsh," Trout told her. "I'm pretty certain it's broken." The wind was so wild they had to shout just to hear each other. "This isn't your fault," Trout hollered. "We just picked the wrong day to leave. I've never seen weather like this." True enough, Oak Grove had more than morning dew for years, and now the sky was swirling and Martha's arm was throbbing. All the same, even if she had to go back, didn't have to ruin everything. "You should go on without me." "Maybe I should," Trout said. "I just don't want to." When Martha heard this, she smiled in spite of the pain she felt. Trout McGill would never abandon his best friend. For the first time in ages, Martha felt happy, even though her arm ached. They woke Eel, who lurched to his feet, arms flailing as though he'd been drowning in his sleep. When they explained they had to turn back, Eel didn't argue, and a part of him, the part that worried about Charlie and Kate McGill's hearts being broken when they opened the brothers' bedroom door and found them gone, was relieved. The weather was more threatening by the minute. Rabbits ran into the hollows. Blackbirds tried to hide in the thickets. Thunder echoed and came closer. Soon enough, the first big drops began to fall. It was the sort of rain that was cold and nasty and fell in sheets, as though a spigot had been turned on up in the sky. Martha was chilled to the bone. The boys, however, weren't bothered in the least by the rain. They drank in the drops and laughed as their clothes and shoes became soaked. Watching them, Martha felt she had never seen her friends happier. It was as if they'd been desperate for water all their lives. In town, people woke up in fear, remembering the storm of the past. The wind had already blown away the note Martha had left for her father and torn the paper into tatters. The same wind whipped through one room after another as Kate and Charlie McGill searched for their sons. The bakery shut down for the first time in 15 years, with a batch of cinnamon rolls still in the oven, for electricity and gas lines were knocked out by the strong gusts. Dogs huddled under tables and refused to go into their yards. Children stayed home from school. The sky looked the way an ocean does when a hurricane is near, with swells 20 feet tall and wind mixing with water, and no mercy for those on land or sea. Martha and the McGill boys knew they had to hurry. The morning had turned dark as night. The friends had never seen a sky so wild. Lightning split the horizon and water poured down. When at last they reached the road, they saw the gullies and ditches had filled and were beginning to overflow. Meadows were turning into lakes, and Penman's Creek was a rushing river whose water were unable to drain because of the stone wall. At first, the water on the road was up to the friends' ankles. Then it was up to their knees. They couldn't help but think of the old days they'd heard about, when all of Oak Grove was submerged underwater and people lost everything they owned. By now, the rain was so heavy, Martha could barely see where she was going. "Just follow the white line down the middle of the road," Trout shouted over the wind. But before long, that line disappeared into the swirl of murky water that was quickly reaching their waists. Eel took out his compass, and they tried their best to head west, huddled together to prevent the wind from buffeting Martha and her aching arm. Just when they thought they had journeyed in the wrong direction, they came upon the sign, "Oak Grove, Home, Sweet Home." Although it had all but vanished in the rising waters, the sign was still the highest, driest spot around. Martha took out her mother's shawl before she let the backpack float away. The three friends hurried to roost on the very top of the sign. From this perch, they saw all over Oak Grove. People climbed onto their rooftops and were clinging to their chimneys. Penman's Creek had overflowed, and the center of town was the hardest hit. "This is horrible," Martha said, thinking of her father having to bail out their basement and the grocery store. She noticed the brothers were grinning. "What is it?" she demanded. "What's so funny?" "It looks like the way we pictured the ocean," Trout told her. The rain had slowed to a mere pitter-patter, and they realized that what they heard now were the flood waters washing back and forth like a tide. "Listen," Eel said. It was just like the echo inside his shell, one wave after another, water as far as you could see. So that's the end of chapter 2. The friends are safely perched on top of the welcome sign, and the town is flooded. So go ahead and finish all of your questions for chapter 2. Again, if you have any questions, email me, and I will audio tape chapter 4 and post that separately on another day. Have a great day.